Picture this moment. You're sitting cross-legged on soft animal furs, the morning sun filtering through the mouth of your cave, home casting dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. The familiar scent of last night's embers mingles with the fresh mountain air. Around you, your tribe is gathering for what seems like an ordinary day, but something electric hangs in the atmosphere, a tension you can't quite name. The elder wise bear rises slowly from his place by the dying fire. His weathered hands grip his walking stick, and in his eyes you see the glint of something mischievous, revolutionary. The entire cave falls silent except for the gentle crackling of cooling wood and the distant call of a hawk outside. From today, his voice echoes off the cave walls, each word deliberate and earth-shaking. The women go hunting, the men stay at home. The silence that follows is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. You feel the collective intake of breath from 30 pairs of lungs, the rustle of animal skins as bodies shift in shock and confusion. What world has just been turned upside down? What ancient order has just been challenged? And where do you fit in this sudden, bewildering change? But before we dive into this extraordinary tale, take a moment to settle deeper into your comfortable space. Feel the softness beneath you. Let your breathing slow and deepen. If you're enjoying this journey into an alternative Stone Age, consider leaving a like or comment. It helps other listeners find these peaceful historical adventures too. Now let yourself sink back into this ancient world where everything familiar is about to become wonderfully, surprisingly different. You watch as the shock of Wise Bear's words ripples through your tribe like stones cast in still water, each circle of impact spreading outward until it touches every person in the cave. The space that moments ago hummed with the comfortable routine of morning preparations, the soft clatter of wooden bowls being arranged for the morning meal, the gentle murmur of sleepy children being coaxed awake, the familiar rustle of people moving through their daily rituals now feels charged with uncertainty and possibility, as if the very air has become thicker, more electric. The men strong elk, who could take down a mammoth single-handedly and whose hunting stories are told around fires throughout the valley, and Swift River, whose spear never missed its mark, even when thrown from impossible distances in the heat of a desperate chase. These giants of the hunt suddenly look relieved. It's an expression you've never seen on their faces before, and it transforms their entire bearing in ways that are both subtle and profound. Strong elk's massive shoulders, which have always carried themselves with the proud straightness of someone accustomed to bearing enormous physical responsibility, actually sag as he exhales deeply. The breath seems to come from somewhere deep in his chest, a release of tension that he may not even have realized he was carrying. "Finally," he murmurs to Swift River, his voice barely audible above the crackling fire, but somehow carrying clearly in the charged atmosphere, "We can relax." The words hang in the air like a confession, and you realize that his voice carries a note of something you've never heard before. Exhaustion beneath the bravado, weariness beneath the strength, a kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes not from a single difficult hunt, but from years, perhaps decades, of carrying the weight of being the primary providers for 30 people's survival. Swift River nods in response, and you see something similar in his expression, a loosening around his eyes, a softening of the perpetual alertness that has always characterized the hunters. His hands, scarred from countless encounters with sharp stones and struggling prey, rest more easily on his knees, as if they too understand that they might soon have different work to do. You turn to look at the women around you, and their reactions are equally revealing in entirely different ways. Bright Moon, whose hands could weave baskets so perfect they held water without leaking baskets, whose patterns told stories, and whose construction required mathematical precision that would challenge any engineer, stares at her delicate fingers as if seeing them for the first time. Her hands, which you've watched, create beauty and function from simple grass and reeds, suddenly seem fragile to her, inadequate for the task that has just been assigned. She says, her voice unusually small, lacking the quiet confidence that usually characterizes her speech. How can we hold a heavy spear? The question carries genuine bewilderment, but also something else, a kind of wondering curiosity, as if she's asking not just whether it's possible, but what it might feel like to try. The question hangs in the smoky air like a challenge to everything your people have ever known, every assumption that has structured their lives, every comfortable certainty that has defined their roles and relationships. Around the circle you can see other women having similar moments of uncertainty and wonder. Gentle Rain touching her own arms as if assessing their strength for the first time. Singing Wolf looking toward the cave entrance where the forest waits with new meaning. River's Edge unconsciously straightening her spine as if preparing for unfamiliar challenges. The silence that follows Bright Moon's question stretches out like the moment between lightning and thunder, filled with potential and uncertainty. You can feel the weight of this moment settling over everyone like a heavy blanket, not uncomfortable, but substantial, significant, life-changing in ways that no one yet fully understands. Wise Bear watches this unfolding with patient eyes that have seen 70 seasons come and go, weathered droughts that killed the weak and abundance that made everyone generous, harsh winters, when survival depended on careful rationing, and bountiful summers when the forest provided more than anyone could use. His lined face holds the wisdom of years, but also something you've never seen there before, something playful, mischievous, as if he's been waiting for exactly this moment to shake up the comfortable patterns your tribe has followed since time began. The sun rises on a new day. He says, his voice gentle but firm, carrying the authority of age and experience, but also something lighter, more experimental. Let us see what we can learn when we step outside the paths our feet have always known. The words seem to release the tension that has held everyone frozen, and suddenly the cave erupts in a flurry of activity that is both chaotic and strangely purposeful. People begin to move, to talk, to question, to examine the familiar tools and spaces of their daily lives with new eyes, as if everything they've taken for granted has suddenly become foreign and interesting. You watch Gentle Rain stand and walk over to where the hunting spears lean against the cave wall like sleeping giants. These weapons, carved from the heartwood of ancient oak trees and tipped with flint that has been knapped with loving precision, represent generations of accumulated knowledge about balance, leverage, and the precise application of force. Each spear is unique, shaped to match the strength and fighting style of its owner, worn smooth by thousands of hours of practice and use. Gentle Rain reaches out tentatively, her fingertips brushing the rough wooden shaft of Strong Elk's favorite spear. The weapon is nearly as tall as she is, its stone point gleaming dully in the morning light, and when she wraps her hand around it, her fingers don't quite meet. The contrast is striking. Her small, precise hands that have spent years learning to identify edible plants and prepare healing medicines, now attempting to grasp a tool designed for very different purposes. "It's heavier than I expected," she murmurs, and there's wonder in her voice rather than complaint. But the balance, it's actually quite beautiful, like a walking staff, but with purpose concentrated in the tip. Her observation draws other women over to examine the hunting gear, and soon you're witnessing something unprecedented. Women who have spent their entire lives focused on gathering, nurturing, and creating, now studying the tools of pursuit and conflict with the same careful attention they've always brought to their own work. Meanwhile, the men are making their own discoveries in the domestic areas of the cave. Strong Elk approaches the food preparation area with the careful respect he usually reserves for approaching dangerous prey. Here are the tools of daily sustenance, grinding stones worn smooth by countless hours of crushing seeds and nuts, clay pots shaped by skilled hands and fired in the cave's central hearth baskets, woven with patterns that are both beautiful and functional bundles of dried herbs whose properties and uses represent a complex pharmacology passed down through generations. "How do you begin?" he asks quietly, and you hear genuine humility in his voice, something that surprises everyone, including himself. Here is a man whose confidence in the forest is absolute, whose knowledge of animal behavior and hunting strategy is encyclopedic, now looking at the domestic tools of daily life as if they represent a completely foreign technology. What follows is perhaps the most touching and amusing morning in the history of your tribe. As the sun climbs higher, sending longer shafts of golden light through the cave entrance, your people begin the process of teaching each other skills that have been separated by tradition for as long as anyone can remember. Bright Moon, still struggling with the weight and balance of a practice spear, becomes the unlikely instructor for spear handling basics. Her approach is characteristically thoughtful and systematic, breaking down the complex motions of thrusting, blocking, and maneuvering into component parts that can be learned and practiced separately. See how the weight wants to pull the tip down? She observes, demonstrating with careful movements that lack the fluid power of male hunters, but reveal an analytical understanding that is uniquely her own. If you fight against that weight, you'll tire quickly, but if you use it, let it help you build momentum, like this. Her demonstration is careful, precise, lacking the explosive force that characterizes male hunting techniques. But there's something graceful about her approach, something that suggests she's thinking about the physics of balance and leverage in ways that are both practical and elegant. River's Edge watches this demonstration with growing interest. It's like tracking, she realizes aloud. Not the direct confrontation, but understanding how forces work together, how to use the natural tendencies instead of fighting against them. Exactly. Bright Moon agrees, and you can hear the excitement building in her voice as she begins to see connections between this new challenge and skills she already possesses. In weaving, you have to understand how different fibers want to behave, how to work with their natural properties rather than forcing them into shapes they can't maintain. On the other side of the cave, the domestic education is proving equally revelatory and challenging. Swift River has successfully gotten a fire started, something he's done countless times on hunting trips, but now he stares at the array of gathered foods spread before him with the expression of someone confronting an entirely alien landscape. The organized abundance is overwhelming. Clay pots of various sizes, each designed for specific cooking purposes. Woven baskets containing different types of seeds and nuts, sorted by size, nutritional content, and preparation requirements. Strips of dried meat hanging from wooden frames, each cut, representing hours of careful work to preserve protein for the lean times. Bundles of herbs whose medicinal and culinary properties represent a complex knowledge system that he's never had to master. The green leaves offers Bright Moon from where she's still practicing spear movements, pointing with the spear tip and nearly poking Gentle Rain in the process. Those are for stomach sickness. Don't put those in the stew unless someone's ill. The red berries are sweet but need to be cooked first. They're bitter raw. Those roots need to be ground fine and mixed with fat to make them digestible. Swift River nods, seriously making mental notes with the same intensity he usually brings to memorizing animal migration patterns. He picks up a handful of seeds and examines them closely, rolling them between his fingers to assess their texture and weight. They're tiny, each one, no bigger than his little fingernail, but apparently they can be transformed through some mysterious domestic alchemy into something nourishing and satisfying. The transformation might as well be magic, for all he understands it, but he's determined to learn. He approaches the grinding stone with the same focused attention he brings to knapping flint, understanding that precision and patience will be required, but not yet knowing what form that precision should take. His first attempts are almost comically unsuccessful. Too gentle a touch and nothing happens. The seeds simply roll around the grinding surface like tiny, mocking marbles. Too much force and they scatter in all directions, bouncing off the cave walls and skittering across the floor like escaped insects, drawing laughter from the children who scramble to collect them. Steady pressure suggests Gentle Rain, who has temporarily given up on spear practice, to observe the domestic efforts with the same analytical attention she once brought to identifying medicinal plants by their subtle differences in leaf shape and growth pattern. Like wearing down a trail through the forest, not all at once but persistently, constantly, understanding that the work happens gradually through sustained effort. As the morning progresses and your people continue their unprecedented education, something beautiful begins to emerge from the initial chaos and confusion. The rigid boundaries that have always defined everyone's role and identity start to soften, revealing capabilities and interests that no one knew existed. You watch Singing Wolf, whose voice has always been reserved for calling children home across long distances and singing lullabies that could soothe the most restless infant, now experimenting with the acoustic properties of the cave as she practices what she calls hunting calls. Her voice, which has always been powerful but used primarily for nurturing purposes, begins to explore ranges and tones that she's never had reason to develop. The sounds she creates are haunting and beautiful, echoing off the cave walls in ways that seem to fill the space with music rather than simple communication. Some of her experimental calls are deep and resonant, carrying the kind of authority that might indeed coordinate a hunting party across difficult terrain. Others are high and sweet sounds that might attract rather than threaten, that could draw curious animals close enough for observation or even conversation. "I never realized," she says, pausing between vocal experiments, "that my voice could do this." She demonstrates a call that starts soft and grows in volume and intensity, demonstrating control and range that surprises even her. Little Hawk. One of the older children who has been watching these adult experiments with fascination claps his hands in delight. "Do the one that sounds like a bird again," he requests, and Singing Wolf obliges with a series of melodic phrases that indeed sound remarkably similar to the songs of the thrushes that nest in the oak trees around your cave. Meanwhile, the men's domestic education is revealing its own unexpected discoveries. Grey Wolf, whose patience during long hunts is legendary, he once waited motionless for 3 days to ambush a particularly cunning elk, has discovered that this same patience translates beautifully to childcare. Unlike the women's practiced efficiency with children, his approach is more methodical, more observational, and surprisingly effective. Children, he realizes aloud while successfully calming a fussy infant, are like prey animals in some ways. They respond to sudden movements with alarm, they're sensitive to changes in voice tone and body posture, and they have their own rhythms and patterns that you need to understand rather than override. The baby in his arms, who had been crying inconsolably just minutes before, has settled into peaceful sleep against his broad chest. Grey Wolf's large hand, scarred from years of weapon work, but surprisingly gentle, rests protectively on the infant's back, moving with the rhythm of tiny breathing. But unlike prey, he continues thoughtfully, they want to be approached. They seek comfort and connection rather than trying to escape it. It's like hunting in reverse. Instead of overcoming wariness, you're building trust. His observation sparks a discussion among the men that would have been impossible before today. They begin sharing their experiences with the morning's childcare challenges, comparing notes with the same seriousness they usually reserve for analyzing hunting strategies. Cloud Walker describes his success in getting little deer to eat her morning meal by turning it into a game rather than a requirement. Thunderbear explains his discovery that different children respond to different types of attention, some wanting active play, others preferring quiet conversation, still others needing simple physical comfort. As the morning sun reaches its peak and begins its slow descent toward afternoon, your cave home has become something unprecedented, a place where traditional roles and expectations have dissolved into something more fluid, more experimental, more alive with possibility. The sounds filling the space are different from any you've heard before. The scrape of grinding stone guided by unfamiliar hands, the soft thud of spear points against leather practice targets wielded by people learning entirely new relationships with their own strength, the rustle of children moving through spaces where adults are focused on unfamiliar tasks, the ongoing conversations of people teaching each other skills that have been separated by tradition for generations. But perhaps most remarkably, there's a quality of attention in the cave that feels new and energizing. Instead of the comfortable but unconscious competence that usually characterizes daily work, everyone is focused with the intensity that comes from learning something completely new. Every task requires thought, observation, adjustment, and patience. Every small success feels like a genuine achievement every failure an interesting lesson rather than a frustrating setback. You can smell the complexity of all this activity, the familiar sense of wood smoke and leather, now joined by the dusty smell of grinding stone being used more intensively than usual, the green freshness of herbs being handled and sorted by people who are learning their properties for the first time, the warm human scent of people working harder than usual, but with obvious enjoyment. The children, initially confused by the disruption of familiar routines, have begun to adapt with the flexibility that characterizes young minds. They move easily between helping their mothers learn hunting skills and watching their fathers navigate domestic challenges, unconsciously absorbing lessons about the arbitrary nature of role divisions, about the excitement that comes from learning new things, about the strength that emerges when people support each other through unfamiliar challenges. Little Hawk in particular seems to understand intuitively that something important is happening. He moves from group to group, asking questions that are both innocent and profound. Why did we never try this before? Are there other things we do just because we've always done them that way? What else might we discover if we keep experimenting? His questions hang in the air like seeds, and you can sense that they're taking root in minds that are already opened by the morning's unprecedented experiences. This day that began as a simple role reversal is becoming something larger, a questioning of assumptions, an exploration of possibilities, a recognition that the boundaries that have always defined your people's lives might be more flexible than anyone imagined. As you sit in the midst of this beautiful chaos, breathing in the sense of change and listening to the sounds of discovery, you feel something shifting deep in your own understanding. The world feels larger, suddenly more full of potential, more responsive to human creativity and adaptability. The future, which has always seemed predictable in its patterns of seasonal cycles and familiar challenges, now seems alive with possibilities that no one has yet imagined. Outside the cave, the forest continues its eternal rhythms, but even it seems to be listening, waiting to see what these humans will discover about themselves when they're brave enough to step outside the comfortable limitations they've accepted for so long. Gentle Rain, who birthed 4 healthy children and never complained about the pain, looks at the massive spears leaning against the cave wall. She reaches out tentatively, her fingertips brushing the rough wooden shaft. The spear is nearly as tall as she is, its stone point gleaming dully in the morning light. You feel the cool cave air on your skin, breathe in the familiar sense of home wood smoke-cured leather, the earthy smell of stored roots and berries. But everything feels different now, as if you're seeing your world through new eyes. The animal skins that seemed perfectly adequate as sleeping furs now appear crude compared to the intricate hunting gear. The cooking fire that provided warmth and nourishment suddenly seems simple compared to the complex strategies needed for bringing down prey. Wise Bear watches the confusion with patient eyes. He's seen 70 seasons come and go, weathered droughts and harsh winters, led your people through migrations and celebrations. His lined face holds the wisdom of years, but also something playful, as if he's been waiting for exactly this moment to shake up the comfortable patterns your tribe has followed since time began. The sun rises on a new day, he says, his voice gentle but firm. Let us see what we can learn. The next few hours pass in a flurry of awkward preparation that would be comical if it weren't so genuinely touching. You watch as River's Edge, the most skilled hunter among the women, attempts to lift Strong Elk's favorite hunting spear. The weapon, carved from the heartwood of an oak tree and tipped with carefully knapped flint, weighs nearly as much as a newborn deer. River's Edge grasps the spear with both hands, her knuckles white with effort. She manages to raise it perhaps 2 feet off the ground before the weight pulls her off balance. She stumbles, catching herself against the cave wall, and everyone holds their breath. But instead of frustration, she starts to laugh, a sound like water bubbling over stones. "Well," she says, brushing dust from her leather tunic, "I suppose we'll need to find a different approach." Around the cave, you see similar scenes of discovery unfolding. Singing Wolf, whose voice could carry across 3 valleys when calling her children home, picks up a hunting knife and tests its weight. The blade, which looked perfectly sized in Swift River's large hands, appears enormous in her smaller grip. She turns it over, carefully studying the careful balance, the way the handle has been worn smooth by years of use. Meanwhile, the men are making their own discoveries. Strong Elk approaches the area where the women have always prepared food, his massive hands hovering uncertainly over the array of tools and containers. A grinding stone worn smooth by countless hours of crushing seeds and nuts sits beside neat piles of dried berries and strips of cured meat.
"How do you begin?" he asks quietly, and you hear genuine humility in his voice, something that surprises everyone, including himself.
Bright Moon, still holding a practice spear that keeps tilting toward the ground, turns to help him. "See those seeds," she says, pointing with the spear tip, and nearly poking gentle rain in the process. "They need to be ground fine, mixed with the dried meat, and..." She pauses, realizing she's trying to explain a day's worth of work in a single breath. Strong Elk nods solemnly as if she's describing the most complex hunting strategy. He picks up the grinding stone, which fits comfortably in one hand, and looks at the seeds as if they're a puzzle he's determined to solve. The morning sun has climbed higher now, sending longer shafts of golden light through the cave entrance. Dust motes dance in the warm air, and you can hear the distant sound of the stream that provides your people with fresh water. Everything is the same as always, yet everything has changed. You notice Wise Bear settling back against his favorite spot on the cave wall, where the stone has been worn smooth by his back over countless evenings of storytelling. His eyes twinkle with something that might be mischief, and you suspect he's enjoying this chaos more than he's admitting. But there's something deeper in his expression too, a kind of satisfaction, as if a plan long in the making is finally unfolding. You wonder how long he's been thinking about this moment, watching the easy assumptions your people have lived by, waiting for the right time to challenge them all. As the morning progresses, the cave becomes a hive of unprecedented activity. You've never seen your home quite like this organized chaos, everyone trying to learn tasks that have belonged to others for as long as anyone can remember. Singing Wolf has found a shorter spear one that was crafted for younger hunters, and she's practicing basic thrusts against a leather practice dummy. Her movements are careful, thoughtful, lacking the fluid power you've always seen in the men's training, but there's something graceful about her approach. She seems to be thinking about each motion, considering the physics of balance and leverage in a way that's uniquely her own. "It's like weaving," she murmurs to River's Edge, who's attempting similar practice nearby. "You have to understand how all the parts work together, not just use force." River's Edge nods, wiping sweat from her forehead. Despite the cool morning air, the unfamiliar physical exertion is warming her up quickly. "I keep thinking about tracking deer," she says. "You don't chase them down with noise and fury. You have to be patient, observant, strategic. You can smell the leather of the practice dummy worn soft by countless training sessions. It's stuffed with dried grass and shaped roughly like a large animal, though its form has become somewhat lopsided over the years. The women's spear thrusts, while less powerful than what you're accustomed to seeing, are precise, aimed at specific points they've identified as vulnerable. On the other side of the cave, the domestic training is proving equally challenging and enlightening. Swift River has managed to get a fire started, something he's done countless times on hunting trips, but now he's staring at an array of gathered foods with the expression of someone confronting an entirely foreign landscape. Before him are clay pots of various sizes, woven baskets containing different types of seeds and nuts, strips of dried meat hanging from the cave wall, and bundles of herbs whose uses he's never had to consider. At home, food appeared magically prepared and ready to eat. Now he's beginning to understand the invisible complexity behind every meal. The green leaves offers Bright Moon from where she's still struggling with spear balance. Those are for the stomach sickness. Don't put those in the stew unless someone's ill. Swift River nods seriously, making a mental note. He picks up a handful of seeds and examines them closely. They're tiny, each one, no bigger than his little fingernail, but apparently they can be transformed into something nourishing and satisfying. The transformation might as well be magic, for all he understands it. You watch as he attempts to use the grinding stone, placing a small pile of seeds on the flat, grinding surface and pressing down with the pestle. His first attempt is too gentle, nothing happens. His second is too forceful, seeds scatter across the floor like tiny, mocking laughter. Steady pressure suggests gentle Rain, who has given up on spear practice for the moment and is observing the domestic efforts with the same analytical attention she once brought to tracking animal signs. Like wearing down a trail through the forest, not all at once, but persistently. The cave fills with the sounds of this unprecedented learning. The scrape of grinding stone against stone, the soft thud of spear points against leather, the rustle of animal skins as people move in unfamiliar patterns, the quiet exchanges of advice and encouragement. But beneath it all, you sense something else, the deep breath your people are taking, collectively, the slight loosening of shoulders that have carried familiar burdens for so long, they'd forgotten those burdens were there. There's nervousness in the air, yes, but also something that feels like relief, curiosity. The excitement of discovering that the world might be bigger and more flexible than anyone had imagined. Outside the cave, the familiar sounds of your territory continue. Unchanged birds calling from the oak trees, the whisper of wind through grass, the distant sound of water over stones. Nature doesn't care about your experiment, but somehow that makes it feel safer, as if you're playing an elaborate game within the larger eternal rhythm of seasons and survival. Wise Bear catches your eye and smiles a warm expression that seems to say, wait until you see what happens next. The sun has reached its mid-morning height when the newly appointed hunting party finally assembles at the cave entrance. You stand with them, feeling the cool mountain air on your face, breathing in the scent of pine needles and the distant promise of rain. The forest stretches out before your group like an ocean of green, familiar yet suddenly foreign now that you'll be entering it with such different purposes. River's Edge has taken the role of hunt leader, and you can see her mind working as she surveys the landscape. Her eyes, which have spent years watching children and reading weather signs for daily planning, now scan the tree line for signs of game trails and potential shelter. She's thinking like a hunter, but her approach is uniquely her own. "We'll move quietly," she says, her voice carrying the same gentle authority she's always used to coordinate gathering expeditions. "If we can't overpower prey the way the men do, we'll have to be smarter about it." Singing Wolf adjusts the smaller spear in her grip and nods. She's bound her long hair back with a strip of leather, and there's something both serious and playful in her expression. "I've been thinking," she says, "about how we call children when they wander too far. Maybe we can use voices in ways the men never considered. The hunting pack you've gathered is unlike any your tribe has seen before. Instead of the swift, powerful group that usually sets out at dawn, you move with more deliberation, more communication. Every few steps, someone points out a detail, a broken branch that might indicate animal passage berries that could serve as emergency food, the direction of the wind and what it might carry to prey you haven't yet discovered. As you walk deeper into the forest, you're struck by how different everything feels. The same paths you've traveled for gathering expeditions now seem charged with new possibility and new danger. Your feet find familiar rocks and roots, but your eyes are searching for different signs, your ears are tuned to different sounds. Bright Moon, who has developed better control of her spear during the morning's practice, touches your arm and points ahead. Through a gap in the trees, you can see a small clearing where deer often come to drink from a seasonal pool. The grass around it is trampled in the telltale pattern of regular visits, and the mud at the water's edge shows fresh hoofprints.
"There," she whispers, and you can hear the excitement in her voice. "But how do we approach?"
It's a good question. The men's hunting strategy has always relied on coordinated speed and strength surrounding prey, using their power to drive animals toward waiting spears, overwhelming through sheer physical presence. But your group doesn't have that option. River's Edge crouches down, studying the clearing with the same careful attention she's always given to choosing the best spots for gathering wild roots. "We wait," she decides. "We learn their patterns, then we think." So you settle into patient observation, something the women of your tribe have always excelled at but never applied to hunting. You find comfortable positions behind fallen logs and among the berry bushes that edge the clearing, places where you can watch without being seen. The forest around you is alive with subtle sounds, the whisper of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of a jay, the soft scurrying of small creatures through the underbrush. You breathe in the earthy smell of decomposing leaves, the green scent of growing things, the faint musk that indicates animals have passed this way recently. Time moves differently here than in the cave. Without the immediate tasks of preparing food or tending fires, you find your awareness expanding to take in details you've never noticed before. The way sunlight filters through different types of leaves, creating patterns that shift and dance. The subtle changes in bird calls that might indicate the approach of larger animals. The complex layering of scents that tells a story about who has been here and when. Singing wolf positioned near a cluster of young oak trees begins to hum very softly, a sound so quiet it's barely audible, but somehow perfectly suited to the forest environment. It's not a hunting call in any traditional sense, but it seems to blend with the natural sounds around you, making your presence feel less intrusive. You realize that this is what hunting might be for your group, not the dramatic confrontation the men have always favored, but something more like an extended conversation with the forest itself. You're not trying to dominate or overpower, you're trying to understand and integrate. After what feels like an hour of patient waiting, your vigilance is rewarded. A small group of deer emerges from the opposite side of the clearing, moving with the fluid caution that has kept their kind alive for countless generations. They approach the water, carefully, ears, constantly moving eyes, scanning for threats. You count 5 animals, 3 dozen, and 2 yearlings, their coats a rich brown that seems to absorb and reflect the dappled forest light. They're beautiful in a way that strikes you more powerfully now that you're seeing them as both potential sustenance and fellow creatures trying to survive in this complex world. Bright Moon catches your eye and gestures with tiny movements toward the deer, then toward herself and Singing Wolf. She's developed some kind of plan, and you can see her working out the details in real time, adapting to circumstances in a way that feels both careful and creative. But just as she's about to signal the beginning of whatever strategy she's conceived, Singing Wolf does something no male hunter has ever attempted. She begins to speak to the deer, her voice so soft and melodious, it's almost like singing. "Beautiful ones," she murmurs, barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying clearly in the still forest air. "We see you there drinking and peaceful. We need food for our children, for our elders. If you could share with us, we would be grateful. If you need to go, we understand." The deer freeze at the sound of her voice, but they don't immediately flee. Their ears swivel toward her hiding place, and you can see them processing this unprecedented experience, a human voice that doesn't shout or threaten, but seems to acknowledge them as fellow beings with their own needs and wisdom. What happens next surprises everyone, including the deer. The council meeting in the sun-dappled meadow becomes a turning point in your strange and wonderful hunting expedition. Sitting in a circle on the soft grass that has been warmed by the morning sun and cushioned by the gentle decay of countless seasons of fallen leaves, your group faces the eternal challenge that has confronted every human society since the beginning of time. How to balance idealistic principles with the practical demands of survival, how to honor both the vision of what might be possible and the reality of what must be accomplished to keep your people alive and thriving. The grass beneath you is thick and springy, mixed with small wildflowers that release their fragrance when compressed. Sweet clover, wild mint, and tiny daisies whose petals seem to glow in the filtered sunlight. The air around you hums with the activity of bees and other pollinators, creating a gentle soundtrack that seems to encourage thoughtful conversation rather than hasty decisions. Bright Moon has been quiet during the morning's unprecedented deer encounter, but now she speaks up with an observation that surprises everyone and opens up entirely new ways of thinking about the challenge you're facing. Her voice carries the same careful precision she brings to her craft work, each word chosen and placed with attention to both accuracy and impact. "I've been watching our dear friends," she says, gesturing toward the clearing where the small herd continues their peaceful morning routines, apparently unaware that they've just participated in the first interspecies negotiation in the history of your people. And I noticed something that might be important. They're not just randomly wandering through the forest, eating whatever they encounter, and moving on. They're following a specific route, visiting places where they know they'll find what they need, but they're also making choices about how much to take and how much to leave. She points toward a cluster of berry bushes at the edge of the meadow where you're sitting. The bushes are heavy with fruit that has ripened to perfect sweetness in the warm spring sun, but as you look more carefully, you can see that the deer have been selective in their foraging. Some areas have been browsed heavily, while other sections remain completely untouched, their berries intact and available for future needs. Look there. Bright Moon continues her observation skills, honed by years of studying patterns in basket weaving and fabric construction now applied to this new challenge. The bushes are heavy with fruit, but the deer only ate from certain areas. They left other sections completely untouched, even though the berries in those areas are just as ripe and accessible. River's Edge follows her gesture and nods, slowly her expression shifting as she begins to understand the implications of what Bright Moon has observed. They're managing their resources, she realizes aloud, her voice carrying the wonder that comes from discovering something completely new about the world. Taking what they need for immediate survival, but leaving enough for the plants to recover, for other animals to find food for future seasons when resources might be more scarce. This observation sparks a discussion that would have been impossible during a traditional hunt, when the focus was entirely on the immediate goal of bringing down prey as quickly and efficiently as possible. Your group begins to see the forest not as a collection of separate resources to be extracted by whoever is strong enough to take them, but as a complex system where every element has a role to play in supporting all the others, where sustainability and long-term thinking are essential for everyone's survival. The concept is revolutionary for people who have always thought about hunting in terms of success or failure, kill or be killed, feast or famine. But it makes perfect sense when viewed through the lens of the domestic skills that women have always practiced, the careful attention to resource management that ensures a family's food supplies last through the winter, the understanding of seasonal cycles that allows for optimal harvesting and preservation, the long-term thinking that considers not just immediate needs but future requirements and the welfare of generations yet to come. Singing Wolf, who has been experimenting with her voice throughout the morning in ways that have revealed entirely new possibilities for human-animal communication, makes another discovery that has profound implications for how your group approaches the challenges of forest provision. Watch this, she says, settling into a comfortable position where her voice can carry clearly through the meadow's natural acoustics. She begins to hum a melody that seems to blend perfectly with the natural sounds of the area, the buzzing of insects, the rustle of grass in the gentle breeze, the distant murmur of water flowing over stones in a creek that meanders through the lower part of the valley. Within moments, small birds begin to gather in the branches above your group, their colorful forms creating a living canopy of curiosity and interest. Finches, thrushes, and even a few of the shy woodland birds that rarely allow humans to see them up close, all drawn by Singing Wolf's unusual vocal performance. But more remarkably, you can hear rustling in the nearby underbrush as other creatures are attracted by her song. Rabbits emerge from their hiding places, moving with cautious curiosity rather than the terror that usually characterizes their encounters with humans. A family of squirrels descends from the oak trees to investigate chittering among themselves in what sounds like animated conversation. They're curious. Singing Wolf explains, her voice filled with wonder at her own discovery. My voice doesn't threaten them the way male voices do when they're used for hunting calls. It makes them want to come closer to investigate to see what this strange creature is that makes such interesting sounds. You realize that your group has stumbled onto something unprecedented in the history of human survival, a hunting strategy based on attraction, rather than pursuit on cooperation, rather than domination on communication, rather than violence. Instead of chasing prey through the forest using speed and strength to overcome the natural advantages that wild animals possess in their own environment, you're discovering ways to invite the forest to reveal its resources to you. The implications are staggering. Traditional hunting requires enormous expenditures of energy, carries significant risks of injury or failure, and often yields results that are unpredictable and difficult to sustain over long periods. But this new approach, if it can be developed and refined, might provide more consistent access to forest resources while requiring less physical strain and creating less disruption to the natural systems that support all life in your territory. But you still haven't solved the immediate practical problem that brought you into the forest in the first place, securing food for your tribe. The deer continue their leisurely browsing pattern. The attracted birds and small mammals are interesting, but don't represent significant sources of nutrition, and the morning is advancing toward afternoon without concrete results that can be taken back to feed the 30 people who depend on your success. It's gentle rain who provides the breakthrough that transforms your entire understanding of what hunting might mean for your group. She's been gathering almost unconsciously as you walk and wait and observe, following patterns learned through years of foraging expeditions that have become so automatic they continue even when her conscious attention is focused on entirely different challenges. Her leather pouch, which started the morning empty, now bulges with an impressive array of foods and materials, nuts that have been gathered from trees along your route, berries that were growing in patches you passed, while tracking the deer-edible roots that she identified and carefully harvested without damaging the parent plant seeds that can be ground into nutritious meal, and even honey that she managed to collect from a wild bee colony using techniques that left the hive undamaged and productive. But it's not just the quantity of her collection that's impressive, it's the diversity and the thoughtful attention to sustainability that has guided her choices. Each item has been selected not just for its immediate nutritional value, but for its role in a balanced diet, its storage properties, its potential medicinal applications, and its seasonal availability. What if hunting doesn't have to mean hunting animals? She asks, settling down in the meadow to display her morning's work and looking around the circle with the expression of someone who has just solved a puzzle that everyone thought was unsolvable. What if it means hunting for everything the forest offers, everything our people need to survive and thrive? The idea is so simple, it's revolutionary, so obvious once stated that everyone wonders why it took so long to occur to them. Your group has been thinking about the role swap in terms of women learning to do exactly what men have always done, tracking large animals, coordinating attacks, bringing down prey through strength and speed and tactical superiority. But perhaps the real opportunity lies not in women becoming substitute men, but in bringing their own approaches, their own skills, their own ways of understanding and interacting with the world to the fundamental challenge of providing for their people's needs. The transformation that follows is both rapid and profound. Within the space of an hour, your hunting party becomes something unprecedented in the history of your tribe, a comprehensive foraging expedition that gathers not just plant foods but also insects, rich in protein, bird eggs from nests that have been naturally abandoned, medicinal plants that will help tribe members stay healthy through the changing seasons, and materials for tools, clothing, and household items that represent wealth and security beyond simple caloric needs. Singing wolf's voice techniques, originally developed for communicating with deer, prove extraordinarily effective for locating resources that traditional hunting expeditions never discover. Her calls attract birds whose flight patterns reveal the locations of fruiting trees, whose nesting behaviors indicate the presence of the insects and small mammals they feed on, whose seasonal movements provide information about weather patterns and resource availability that helps optimize foraging strategies. But more than just attracting animals, her voice seems to create a different relationship with the forest environment. Instead of the tense adversarial atmosphere that characterizes traditional hunting, where every sound must be suppressed, every movement carefully concealed, every action directed toward overcoming the forest's natural defenses, Singing Wolf's approach creates something more like partnership. The birds that gather in response to her calls don't just provide information about resource locations, they also seem to enjoy the interaction, responding to her vocalizations with songs of their own, creating a complex musical dialogue that enriches the experience for everyone involved. Even the deer, still visible in their clearing, lift their heads to listen when she sings, their ears forward in attitudes of attention rather than alarm. River's Edge's tracking skills, refined through years of following children's wandering path and understanding the subtle signs that indicate where a lost child might have gone, prove excellently suited to the more complex challenge of reading forest signs for comprehensive resource management. But her approach differs significantly from traditional tracking, which focuses on following specific animals toward predetermined goals. Instead, River's Edge reads the landscape like a story that reveals the complex web of relationships connecting all the forest's inhabitants. She can tell from browsing patterns which areas are heavily used by deer and which are avoided, information that helps her understand seasonal food preferences and optimal locations for sustainable plant harvesting. She can identify the trails used by small mammals, knowledge that reveals the location of seed caches and underground food stores that can be partially harvested without disrupting the animal's survival strategies. Most importantly, her tracking skills help her understand the forest as a dynamic system where every action has consequences, where taking resources from one area affects availability in others, where timing and location and method of harvest can mean the difference between sustainable abundance and destructive depletion. Bright Moon's eye for patterns, developed through years of creating intricate basket weaves and textile designs, helps her identify which plants are ready for harvest and which should be left to mature further. But her contributions go far beyond simple plant identification. She begins to see the forest itself as a vast, complex pattern, seasonal cycles that determine when different resources become available, growth patterns that reveal optimal harvesting locations, color and texture variations that indicate plant health and nutritional content. Her pattern recognition skills also prove valuable for understanding animal behavior in ways that complement Singing Wolf's communication techniques and River's Edge's tracking abilities. She can predict where deer are likely to move based on feeding patterns she observes, where birds are likely to nest based on territorial behaviors. She notices where small mammals are likely to store food based on gathering activities she witnesses. As you begin the journey back toward your cave home, or your leather bags heavy with diverse foods and materials that represent a completely different kind of hunting success, you feel a profound sense of accomplishment that goes far beyond the simple satisfaction of completing a successful foraging expedition. Your group has not just gathered resources that will nourish your people for days, you've discovered an entirely new approach to the fundamental challenge of survival, one that works with natural systems rather than against them, that builds relationships rather than simply taking what's needed, that creates abundance through understanding rather than scarcity through competition. But perhaps most importantly, you've demonstrated that the skills and perspectives women have always brought to the domestic aspects of tribal life are not just valuable for the tasks traditionally assigned to them. When applied to the broader challenge of resource management, these skills reveal possibilities that have been invisible to traditional approaches, solutions that are more sustainable, more reliable, and more respectful of the complex web of relationships that connect all life in your forest home. The deer, who have been your unusual companions throughout this unprecedented hunting experience, seem to understand that your experiment is concluding. The matriarch doe approaches your group one final time as you prepare to leave the meadow, and Singing Wolf offers her thanks for what has been in many ways the most educational morning of her life. "We'll remember this," she tells the doe, her voice carrying the same sincerity that characterized her earlier communications, but now enriched by hours of successful cooperation and mutual respect. "We'll remember that the forest is big enough for all of us and wise enough to provide for everyone who approaches it with patience and respect rather than force and haste." The doe makes her soft, conversational sound one last time, then leads her family back into the deeper forest, moving with the fluid grace that has always characterized her kind, but which you now understand represents not just physical ability, but a sophisticated intelligence about how to live sustainably in a complex, interconnected world. As you walk back toward your cave home, following familiar paths that now seem rich with new possibilities and previously unnoticed resources, you can't help but smile at how the day has unfolded. Your tribe expected the women to learn to hunt like men, to adapt their smaller size and different strengths to traditional masculine approaches to forest provision. Instead, you've invented an entirely new approach to the ancient challenge of survival, one that might actually be more effective than conventional methods, even though it's completely different from what anyone anticipated. More importantly, you've discovered that the boundaries that have always defined gender roles in your society are far more flexible than anyone imagined, that capabilities exist in unexpected places, that innovation emerges when people are free to apply their unique strengths to challenges that have previously been defined too narrowly. The forest around you seems to approve of your discoveries. Birds continue to accompany your small procession, as if celebrating your success in learning to work with rather than against the natural world. The afternoon sun filters through the canopy with a warmth that feels like benediction, and even the usually shy woodland creatures seem more visible, more willing to share their territory with humans who have demonstrated that they can be respectful neighbors rather than destructive invaders. As your cave comes into view through the trees, you can see the familiar plume of smoke rising from the central fire, and you can hear the distant sounds of your people going about their daily routines. But you know that what you're bringing back represents more than just food and materials for immediate use. You're returning with proof that the world is larger and more flexible than anyone suspected, that survival strategies can be innovative rather than simply traditional, that cooperation creates possibilities that competition could never achieve. Most importantly, you're bringing back a new understanding of what it means to be a provider, a protector, a contributing member of a community that depends on everyone's unique gifts for its continued prosperity and growth. While your hunting party has been revolutionizing the concept of forest provision, the men back at the cave have been engaged in their own series of discoveries, some more successful than others, all of them revealing aspects of domestic life that no male member of your tribe has ever had the opportunity to understand or appreciate. As you approach your home territory, following the familiar path that winds between the great oak trees and along the stream that provides your people with fresh water year-round, you can hear the sounds of unprecedented domestic chaos drifting from the cave entrance like music from an entirely new kind of celebration. The rhythmic clatter of dropped utensils being retrieved and repositioned, the frustrated but determined huffing of large men trying to master delicate tasks that require finesse rather than strength, occasional bursts of surprised laughter, and something that might be singing. The sounds are so different from the usual afternoon atmosphere of your home that you pause at the forest edge, exchanging glances with your hunting companions as you all try to decode what you're hearing. There's no distress in the voices, no alarm or crisis, but there's definitely a quality of chaos that suggests the domestic routine has been significantly modified during your absence. The scene that greets you as you enter the cave is both heartwarming and hilarious, a tableau that will be remembered and retold with affection and amusement for generations to come. The familiar space of your home has been transformed into something that looks like a combination workshop, experimental kitchen, nursery, and disaster area, all presided over by men who are clearly working harder than they've ever worked in their lives, but who also seem to be enjoying themselves in ways that are completely unprecedented. Strong elk, whose hands have brought down countless dangerous predators with precision and deadly efficiency, is currently engaged in what appears to be an epic battle with Little Fox's leather baby carrier, the device which Bright Moon can assemble and adjust in moments. With the unconscious competence that comes from daily practice, has somehow become a complex tangle of straps and loops and buckles that seems to be winning the contest through pure malicious engineering. It's like it's alive. Strong Elk mutters, holding up the offending object and staring at it with the same intense focus he usually reserves for tracking wounded bears or analyzing the defensive capabilities of mammoth herds. His massive hands, scarred from years of weapon work and skilled at crafting the most complex hunting tools, appear almost comically oversized as they attempt to navigate the intricate fastening system that holds babies securely while allowing for easy adjustment and quick access. "Every time I think I have it figured out," he continues, his voice carrying the bewildered frustration of someone confronting a puzzle that operates according to entirely unfamiliar principles, "it does something different. The straps that were cooperating a moment ago suddenly become impossible to reach. The buckles that seemed perfectly logical now appear to be attached to completely different parts of the system." Baby Fox. Bright Moon's youngest watches this performance from his position on a soft fur rug, with the grave attention of someone witnessing a fascinating scientific experiment. The baby shows no distress at being temporarily separated from his usual carrier. Instead, he seems genuinely interested in discovering whether this large, gentle man will eventually solve the puzzle that has defeated him for what appears to have been several hours. Little Fox gurgles occasionally, making sounds that could be interpreted as encouragement or commentary. His bright eyes following Strong Elk's movements with the kind of focused attention that suggests he's learning something important about problem-solving persistence and the value of approaching challenges from multiple angles when the obvious solutions don't work. Swift River has achieved more concrete success with food preparation, though his methods are unconventional to say the least, and the area around the cooking fire bears testament to his experimental approach to domestic arts. The space which usually maintains the organized efficiency that comes from generations of women who have perfected systems for managing multiple tasks simultaneously now looks like a whirlwind. Struck it, but a purposeful whirlwind one that has been searching for solutions rather than simply creating chaos. Grinding stones are scattered around the fire pit, each bearing various degrees of seed residue that tells the story of Swift River's learning process. Some stones show the fine, even powder that indicates successful technique, while others display the coarse, uneven results that come from applying too much force too quickly, or the scattered debris that suggests seeds escaped in all directions when pressure was applied at the wrong angle or with insufficient control. Clay pots of different sizes contain mysterious mixtures in various stages of preparation, some that look recognizably like food, others that appear to be experiments in combining ingredients that have never been combined before, a few that seem to represent entirely new approaches to the fundamental challenge of transforming raw materials into nourishment. What appears to be an entire day's worth of firewood has been reduced to a pile of fine ash, evidence of Swift River's generous approach to fuel management and his determination to maintain optimal cooking temperatures regardless of efficiency considerations. The abundance of ash, however, has had the unintended benefit of creating the hottest, most evenly distributed cooking heat your cave has ever experienced. "I think I understand the principle." Swift River announces, proudly gesturing toward a large, wooden bowl filled with something that might generously be called porridge, but which represents his personal interpretation of how seeds, water, heat, and time should interact to create sustenance. You take the seeds, you pound them until they're fine, you add water in the right proportions, you apply heat consistently, and you stir regularly to prevent sticking. Simple. His explanation reveals both his logical approach to domestic challenges and his characteristic underestimation of the complexity involved in tasks that appear straightforward, but require subtle understanding of timing, proportions, and the countless small adjustments that turn basic processes into successful outcomes. The result of this simple process is a thick, greyish substance that bears little resemblance to any food you've ever seen, but which clearly represents enormous effort and genuine care applied to the challenge of feeding his people. The porridge has an unusual texture, smoother in some areas, chunkier in others, and a color that suggests Swift River may have included some ingredients that traditional cooks would consider experimental. But there's something touching about his pride in having produced something edible through his own labor, something that speaks to the deep satisfaction that comes from successfully completing tasks that require learning entirely new skills, adapting to entirely different ways of thinking about familiar problems. Little Hawk One of the older children, whose natural curiosity has made him the unofficial test subject for several of the day's domestic experiments, approaches the bowl of experimental porridge with the fearless curiosity of youth and the practical hunger of someone who has been playing hard all morning while the adults struggled with unfamiliar challenges. He takes a small taste, his expression shifting through surprise consideration and what might be diplomatic acceptance as he processes flavors and textures that are completely outside his previous experience. His face reveals the internal debate between honesty and kindness that characterizes children who are trying to be supportive while also being truthful.
It's interesting, he announces finally, his tone carefully neutral, but not unkind. Different from what Mother makes, but not bad, just different.
It tastes a bit burnt, Swift River admits with the rueful honesty of someone who has learned to recognize his own limitations while still taking pride in his efforts. But it's full of artistry. I was trying to create something that would be nourishing and flavorful, and I think I may have prioritized creativity over conventional techniques. You realize that he's absolutely right, though perhaps not in the way he intended. The food may not be perfectly prepared by traditional standards, but it does represent something new and valuable, a man's careful attention to the nutritional needs of his people, his willingness to learn skills that have never been expected of him, his creative problem-solving applied to domestic challenges that require patience, observation, and the kind of subtle understanding that comes only through practice and experience. Meanwhile, the childcare situation has evolved into something that can only be described as organized chaos, but chaos of the most productive and heartwarming variety. The men have discovered that caring for children requires completely different skills than hunting or warfare, and they're applying their various strengths to this challenge in unexpected ways that reveal both their adaptability and their hidden nurturing capabilities. Grey Wolf, whose patience during long hunts is legendary among your people, he once waited motionless for 3 days and nights to ambush a particularly cunning elk that had eluded multiple hunting parties, has become the undisputed master of infant soothing. His approach to crying babies is methodical, observant, and surprisingly effective, drawing on the same skills that have made him successful in situations that require sustained focus and careful attention to subtle environmental changes. He's developed a repertoire of deep, rumbling songs that seem to resonate at exactly the frequency needed to calm fussy infants. His voice, which can carry hunting calls across vast distances and coordinate complex group activities during dangerous encounters with predators, turns out to be remarkably effective at creating the kind of sonic environment that helps little ones relax and settle into peaceful sleep. It's about matching their rhythm, he explains to Thunderbear, who has been observing his techniques with the focused attention usually reserved for learning new hunting strategies. Grey Wolf gently bounces a drowsy toddler while humming a melody you've never heard before, something that seems to combine traditional songs with his own musical innovations, creating sounds that are both familiar and surprisingly soothing. Just like you have to match the rhythm of the forest when you're tracking, he continues, his voice soft enough not to disturb the child in his arms, but clear enough to carry his insights to others who are struggling with similar challenges. Children have their own natural rhythms, breathing patterns, sleep cycles, feeding needs, periods of high energy, and times when they need quiet comfort. If you try to impose your rhythm on them, you create conflict. But if you observe their patterns and work with them, everything becomes easier. His observation reveals a fundamental truth about childcare that the women of your tribe have always understood intuitively, but have never had occasion to articulate to men who weren't expected to need such knowledge. The revelation that the same skills that make someone effective in hunting and tracking can be applied to understanding and responding to children's needs represents a breakthrough that will influence how your people think about parenting for generations to come. But the men have also encountered challenges that no amount of hunting expertise has prepared them to handle. When you arrive at the cave, Cloudwalker is standing in the middle of the domestic area, holding little deer gentle Rain's 3-year-old daughter, who is expressing her displeasure about something through a series of increasingly dramatic wails that echo off the cave walls with surprising volume and persistence. Cloudwalker, whose competence in crisis situations has been tested and proven countless times during dangerous hunting expeditions and emergency situations that threatened the entire tribe's survival, now looks completely bewildered by a challenge that weighs less than 30 pounds and stands barely 3 feet tall.
"I don't understand," he says, his voice carrying the same bewildered tone he might use when encountering completely unfamiliar animal tracks or dealing with weather patterns that don't match any previous experience. She was happy just moments ago. She was playing with the carved wooden animals, laughing at the faces I was making, participating in what seemed like a perfectly pleasant interaction.
He shifts Little Deer to a different position, trying to find a way to hold her that might address whatever discomfort she's experiencing, but his movements are tentative, careful, lacking the confident decisiveness that characterizes his usual approach to problem solving.
And then suddenly, he gestures helplessly at the crying child, his expression revealing the frustration that comes from confronting a situation where all his usual skills and knowledge seem irrelevant, where the logical approaches that work for every other challenge he's faced prove completely ineffective.
She might be hungry, suggests Thunderbear, who has been observing from what he considers a safe distance, his tone carrying the careful neutrality of someone offering advice about a subject where he has no expertise, but hopes to be helpful anyway. Or tired, or she might want her mother, or she might be uncomfortable for reasons we can't see, or she might just be small and complicated. It's a remarkably accurate summary of both the immediate challenges of childcare and the broader recognition that young humans operate according to complex internal processes that are not always accessible to logical analysis or predictable response. Thunderbear's assessment reveals that even men who have never been responsible for children possess intuitive understanding about the nature of these small, mysterious beings who share their homes, but whose needs and behaviors often seem to follow entirely different rules than those that govern adult activities. Little Deer's crying gradually subsides as Cloudwalker continues his patient efforts to understand and address whatever is troubling her. His movements become more confident as he discovers that gentle swaying motion seems to help, that soft humming has a calming effect similar to Grey Wolf's more systematic vocal techniques, that sometimes simply changing the child's position or providing a different view of the cave environment can transform distress into contentment. The process of learning to comfort her becomes a lesson in empathy, observation, and the kind of responsive flexibility that has always characterized the best parenting, but which Cloudwalker is experiencing for the first time as a direct responsibility, rather than something he observes from a distance. The most surprising development of the day, however, has occurred in the area of clothing and craft production, where the men's different physical capabilities and engineering approaches have led to innovations that no one anticipated when the Great Role Reversal began. Spotted Eagle, whose large hands have always seemed suited only for gripping weapons and hunting tools for tasks that require strength and power rather than delicacy and precision, has spent the morning attempting to sew animal skins into garments that will provide warmth and protection for the coming seasons. His approach to this challenge reveals both the limitations of his traditional skill set and the unexpected creativity that emerges when familiar capabilities are applied to unfamiliar problems. The results of his efforts are unconventional, to say the least. What he's created looks less like traditional hunting clothes or domestic wear, and more like a series of connected leather panels that might charitably be described as an experimental wraparound garment. The construction shows evidence of his engineering mindset, reinforced stress points, efficient use of materials, attention to durability, but also reveals his unfamiliarity with the subtle aspects of garment construction that make clothing comfortable and functional for daily wear. But when he puts on his creation and models it for the group, something unexpected happens. It actually looks quite practical and comfortable despite its departure from traditional design principles. The garment provides full coverage while allowing for freedom of movement, offers multiple adjustment points for different body sizes and weather conditions, and incorporates storage pockets and attachment points for tools in ways that conventional clothing designs have never considered. It's like a tunic and leggings combined into one garment, he explains, demonstrating how the innovative design allows him to move freely while providing warmth and protection. His voice carries the excitement of someone who has discovered a solution to problems he didn't even know existed, who has approached familiar challenges from entirely new angles and found possibilities that previous approaches never revealed. I thought, why does clothing have to be separate pieces that can become disconnected, lost, or create gaps where cold air can enter? He continues, warming to his subject, as he realizes that his experimental approach has produced genuine innovations rather than simply makeshift solutions. Why not make it all integrated so everything works together as a system rather than as individual components that have to be coordinated? The other men examine his innovation with the kind of serious attention they usually reserve for new hunting technologies or weapon designs. Red Hawk tries on a similar garment that Spotted Eagle has constructed using refined techniques based on his morning's learning, and the two of them begin discussing modifications and improvements with the same enthusiasm and analytical rigor they usually apply to perfecting their hunting equipment. This could be really useful for winter hunting expeditions. Red Hawk realizes testing the range of motion the garment allows while maintaining full coverage. No gaps where cold can penetrate, no separate pieces to lose or snag on branches when you're moving quickly through dense forest, no need to carry extra clothing for different weather conditions because everything adjusts to circumstances. Their conversation reveals that they're not simply learning to do women's work exactly as women have always done it. They're bringing their own perspectives, skills, and creative approaches to domestic challenges and discovering solutions that are genuinely innovative, even if they're different from traditional methods. As you settle back into the warmth and familiarity of your cave home, surrounded by the scents of experimental cooking and the sounds of children being cared for in new ways, you realize that today's experiment has revealed something profound about the capabilities and creative potential of your people. When roles are swapped, when assumptions are challenged, when everyone is forced to step outside their familiar patterns and comfort zones, creativity flourishes in directions that no one anticipated. The men haven't simply learned to perform women's tasks according to established methods. They've brought their own strengths and perspectives to these challenges and discovered possibilities that have been invisible to traditional approaches. You can smell the complex mixture of scents that tells the story of the day's domestic adventures. The wood smoke from Swift River's enthusiastic fire management, the earthy smell of ground seeds and experimental porridge, the leather and bone scents of Spotted Eagle's crafting innovations, the warm human smells of children who have been held and comforted by hands that are still learning the delicate arts of nurturing care. But underlying all these individual scents is something else, something that might be called the fragrance of transformation, the subtle but unmistakable indication that change is occurring, that boundaries are being questioned, that new possibilities are emerging from the creative tension between traditional wisdom and innovative approaches to age-old challenges. As the afternoon progresses and the sun begins its slow descent toward the western peaks, something remarkable occurs that no one anticipated when this day of role reversal began. Instead of simply waiting for evening to discuss their experiences, the hunters and the homekeepers begin to share their discoveries in real time, creating an ongoing dialogue that transforms both groups' understanding of their own activities and each other's challenges. Bright Moon. Examining Swift River's experimental porridge with the analytical attention she usually brings to evaluating plant fibers for weaving makes an observation that surprises everyone. This texture is actually quite interesting. It's different from our usual grain preparations, but it has qualities that might make it better for certain purposes. She takes another careful taste, her experienced palate, identifying flavors and nutritional elements that less trained senses might miss. The slight burning you mentioned has created a nutty flavor that's quite pleasant, and the way you've ground the seeds coarser than we usually do means this will be more filling, will provide energy that lasts longer than our traditional fine ground porridge. Swift River's face lights up with the recognition that his experimental approach has produced not just edible food, but food with distinct advantages for specific circumstances. The slight embarrassment he felt about the unconventional appearance of his creation gives way to genuine pride in having contributed something valuable to his people's culinary traditions. What if, Bright Moon continues thoughtfully, we combined your grinding technique with some of the flavor combinations we discovered in the forest today? Singing Wolf found that certain wild herbs complement grains beautifully, and River's Edge identified roots that could add both nutrition and taste to this base. The conversation that follows represents something unprecedented in your tribe's history, a real-time sharing of knowledge across traditional gender boundaries, with each group's discoveries informing and enhancing the other's innovations. Instead of the formal ritualized knowledge sharing that has always characterized important tribal discussions, this exchange is organic, immediate, and mutually beneficial. River's Edge, still carrying her gathering pouches filled with the morning's forest discoveries, begins to display her collection for the men who have spent the day managing domestic responsibilities. Each item she presents is accompanied by detailed information about its properties, optimal preparation methods, seasonal availability, and potential applications that extend far beyond simple nutrition. These roots, she explains, holding up tubers that she carefully excavated from the forest floor, using techniques that ensure the parent plants will continue to thrive, can be prepared in multiple ways depending on your needs. Eaten raw, they provide quick energy and have a crisp, refreshing taste that's particularly valuable during long hunting expeditions. She demonstrates the preparation technique using one of the stone knives that have been refined during the morning's domestic experiments. Her movements are precise, economical, showing how to remove the outer skin while preserving the maximum amount of nutritious flesh underneath. Cooked slowly in the coals, she continues, they become sweet and soft, perfect for children or elders who have difficulty chewing tougher foods. But if you grind them fine and mix them with other ingredients like Swift River's grain base, they add both nutrition and a subtle flavor that enhances everything else in the mixture. Grey Wolf, who has spent much of the afternoon perfecting his infant care techniques, watches this demonstration with the focused attention he usually reserves for tracking lessons. Could these roots be prepared in ways that would be particularly good for nursing mothers? Something that would help them maintain their strength while feeding their babies. The question reveals not just his growing understanding of domestic challenges, but his recognition that the traditional male separation from issues related to childbirth and early childcare has limited his ability to support his people during some of their most vulnerable and important times. River's Edge nods enthusiastically. Actually, yes. These particular roots, when combined with certain herbs that Singing Wolf identified during our forest expedition, create a preparation that supports women's health during pregnancy and nursing. The knowledge has always existed among the women, but we've never had occasion to share it with the men who might be in positions to gather or prepare these resources. Perhaps most remarkably, the children who have witnessed today's unprecedented role reversal are beginning to contribute their own insights to the ongoing discussion, their observations revealing aspects of the experiment that the adults are too close to their own experiences to notice clearly. Little Hawk, who has spent the day moving between groups and observing both the domestic innovations and the hunting expedition's preparations, offers an observation that brings new clarity to everyone's understanding of what has been accomplished. It seems like everyone is doing the same things they always did, but in different places and with different tools. His simple statement reveals a profound truth that the adults have been too immersed in the details of their challenges to articulate clearly. The fundamental skills that make someone competent at hunting, patience, observation, problem-solving, adaptation to changing circumstances, are the same skills that make someone effective at domestic work. The difference lies not in the capabilities required, but in the contexts where those capabilities are applied. Little Deer, who has been the beneficiary of several men's learning experiences in childcare, adds her own perspective with the directness that characterizes children's insights. Grey Wolf sings different songs than Mother does, but they make me feel the same way, safe and sleepy. Her observation highlights another important discovery of the day, that there are many different approaches to achieving the same essential goals, and that diversity of method can actually strengthen overall effectiveness rather than diminishing it. The children's contributions to the conversation represent something that would have been unthinkable before today's role reversal. In traditional tribal discussions, children are expected to listen and learn, but not to offer insights or analysis that might influence adult decision-making. But the day's experiments have created an atmosphere where different perspectives are valued, where innovation is celebrated regardless of its source, where the boundary between teachers and students has become more fluid and reciprocal. Young Fox, one of the older children who has been helping with various tasks throughout the day, makes a suggestion that demonstrates how quickly young minds adapt to new possibilities. What if we had more days like this? Not switching all the way, but having everyone learn some of everything, so we all know how to help with different things when we need to. His proposal represents a fundamental shift in how your tribe might organize itself, moving away from rigid role divisions toward a more flexible system where everyone possesses multiple capabilities and can contribute wherever their skills are most needed at any given time. As the afternoon light begins to take on the golden quality that indicates the approach of evening, Wise Bear emerges from the deeper recesses of the cave where he has spent much of the day in quiet observation. His presence immediately draws everyone's attention, not because he demands it, but because his manner suggests that he has been processing the day's events and is ready to share insights that only his years of experience and perspective could provide. He settles into his favorite spot near the cave wall where the stone has been worn smooth by decades of his presence during important tribal discussions. His movements are careful but not labored, and his expression carries the satisfaction of someone whose long-held theories are being confirmed by practical experience. I have been watching, he begins his voice, carrying easily through the cave despite its gentle tone. And I have been thinking about what we have learned today, what we have discovered about ourselves, and about the possibilities that exist when we question the boundaries we have accepted as unchangeable. As he pauses, letting his gaze travel around the assembled group, taking in the evidence of the day's experiments, Swift River's innovative cooking equipment, Spotted Eagle's revolutionary clothing, designs the children who are being held and cared for by hands that are still learning gentleness, the hunting equipment that has been adapted for different users, the domestic tools that have been approached with new understanding. What I see, he continues, is not that men have learned to do women's work or that women have learned to do men's work. What I see is that we have all learned to do human work, the work of surviving and thriving together in a world that requires all of our gifts, all of our capabilities, all of our creativity and wisdom. His words settle over the group like a blessing, providing a framework for understanding the day's experiences that elevates them beyond simple role swapping into something more profound and transformative. The forest does not ask the oak tree to apologize for being strong or the willow to be ashamed of being flexible. Wise Bear observes his voice taking on the rhythmic quality that characterizes his best storytelling. Each contributes what it can to the health of the whole forest, and the forest flourishes because of this diversity, not in spite of it. He gestures toward the cave entrance where the afternoon light reveals the complex ecosystem that surrounds your home. Trees of different species plants that serve different functions, animals that fill different ecological niches, all interconnected in ways that create abundance and sustainability. Our people can learn from this wisdom, he continues. We can be strong like the oak when strength is needed, flexible like the willow when adaptation is required, deep-rooted like the pine when stability is essential, and quick-growing like the aspen when rapid response serves our survival. As evening approaches and the day's experiments begin to settle into new understanding, something unexpected emerges from the integration of traditionally separate knowledge systems. The combination of male engineering approaches with female nurturing expertise begins to produce innovations that neither group could have developed independently. Spotted Eagle, working with Bright Moon to refine his experimental clothing designs, discovers that her understanding of how fabrics behave in different weather conditions can be combined with his structural engineering insights to create garments that are not just functional but optimally adapted to the specific challenges faced by your people in their mountain environment. The problem with traditional winter clothing by Bright Moon explains as she examines the reinforced stress points in Spotted Eagle's latest design, is that it works well when you're stationary, but becomes either too hot or too restrictive when you need to move quickly or work vigorously. She demonstrates how the conventional layering system, while effective for basic warmth, creates bulk that interferes with the precise movements required for hunting or the sustained activity needed for long-distance travel. But your integrated approach, she continues testing the range of motion that the new garment allows, solves that problem by creating zones with different properties. Areas that need maximum warmth have multiple layers and wind resistance, while areas that need flexibility have lighter construction and ventilation options. Spotted Eagle nods enthusiastically, his engineering mind immediately grasping the implications of her analysis. And we could extend this principle to create specialized versions for different activities, hunting gear that optimizes stealth and mobility domestic wear, that prioritizes durability and ease of cleaning ceremonial clothing, that emphasizes beauty and symbolic meaning. Their collaboration represents something entirely new in your tribe's technological development, the systematic application of engineering principles to problems that have traditionally been solved through intuition and accumulated experience. The results are innovations that maintain the wisdom of traditional approaches while incorporating improvements that dramatically enhance functionality. Similarly, Swift River's experimental cooking techniques, when combined with the women's detailed knowledge of plant properties and nutritional requirements, begin to produce food preparation methods that are more efficient, more nutritious, and more adaptable to varying circumstances than either approach could achieve independently. The key insight River's Edge realizes as she watches Swift River's systematic approach to heat management and ingredient combination is that cooking is actually a form of engineering understanding how heat, time, and chemical properties interact to transform raw materials into something more valuable than the sum of their parts. This recognition leads to a series of collaborative experiments that produce remarkable results, cooking methods that preserve more nutrients while requiring less fuel food combinations, that provide more complete nutrition while using ingredients that are abundant in your local environment preservation techniques that extend storage life while maintaining flavor and nutritional value. As the sun touches the western horizon and the familiar sounds of evening begin to replace the productive activity of afternoon work, your tribe naturally gathers around the central fire for what has become an informal celebration of the day's discoveries. But unlike the formal evening assemblies that typically characterize important tribal discussions, tonight's gathering has the relaxed, celebratory atmosphere of people who have shared an adventure and are eager to continue processing what they've learned. The fire built up to its evening strength with wood that has been efficiently prepared using Swift River's systematic approach to fuel management creates a warm circle of light that draws everyone together in the familiar pattern that has characterized human community since fire was first tamed. The flames dance and flicker, sending sparks spiraling up toward the darkening sky, visible through the cave entrance, and the scent of burning wood mingles with the aromas of the experimental foods that will constitute tonight's meal. Children who have spent the day witnessing unprecedented changes in their familiar world settle into the comfortable proximity of adults who are still processing their own transformative experiences. But instead of the usual evening routine of children listening, while adults conduct tribal business, tonight's gathering includes everyone as active participants in an ongoing conversation about possibilities and discoveries. The seating arrangement that emerges naturally reflects the day's breakdown of traditional boundaries. Instead of the customary separation between hunters and gatherers, men and women, adults and children, people arrange themselves in mixed groups where conversations can flow easily across old divisions, where the day's partnerships can continue their collaborative exploration of new ideas. Little Fox settles beside Grey Wolf, who has become his preferred source of lullabies and comfort, while Bright Moon sits near Swift River to continue their discussion of cooking innovations. The hunting party arranges itself to include both the men who provided domestic support and the children who contributed their own insights to the day's experiments. As the sun begins its final descent behind the western mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of amber rose, and deep purple that reflect off the few wispy clouds scattered across the vast expanse of evening sky. Your entire tribe gathers around the central fire for what has become known in tribal memory as the Great Evening Reckoning. The flames dance and crackle with unusual vigor, fed by the abundant wood that Swift River's systematic approach to fuel gathering has provided, sending cascades of sparks spiraling upward toward the cave ceiling like tiny golden stars seeking their home in the darkening heavens. You settle onto your favorite spot among the soft animal furs that have been arranged in an expanded circle to accommodate tonight's larger and more inclusive gathering. The familiar texture of the well-worn hides beneath you provides comfort and stability, while the warmth of the fire on your face creates that perfect balance of temperature that encourages both alertness and relaxation. Around the circle faces are illuminated by the flickering firelight, each one marked by the day's experiences in subtle but unmistakable ways. Some tired but satisfied, others energized by discoveries, all bearing the unmistakable signs of people who have stretched beyond their comfortable limitations and found capabilities they never knew they possessed. The scents that surround you tell the story of this unprecedented day in layers of complexity that will remain in your memory long after the specific details fade. The familiar fragrance of wood smoke mingles with the experimental aromas of Swift River's innovative cooking, nutty, earthy scents that speak of grains prepared in new ways, combined with the green vitality of the forest resources that the hunting party discovered during their revolutionary expedition. You can smell the leather and plant dyes of Spotted Eagle's clothing innovations, materials that have been worked and shaped by hands that are learning entirely new relationships with fabric and function. There's the sweet scent of wild honey that Singing Wolf's voice techniques helped locate, mixed with the more subtle fragrances of medicinal herbs that will strengthen your people through the changing seasons. But underlying all these specific scents is something that might be called the fragrance of transformation itself, a subtle but unmistakable indication that change has occurred, that boundaries have shifted, that new possibilities have been born from the creative tension between tradition and innovation. River's Edge, still wearing the lightweight hunting gear that has become surprisingly comfortable over the course of the day, is the first to speak, and her voice carries a satisfaction that's different from the triumph of traditional hunts, deeper and more sustainable than the temporary victory that comes from bringing down a single large animal. We have much to share with all of you. She begins her words, carefully chosen to include not just her hunting companions, but also the men who spent the day exploring domestic challenges, the children who witnessed and contributed to the day's experiments, the elders who have been observing and processing these unprecedented changes. We learned that the forest holds more gifts than we ever imagined, and that there are many different ways to be a provider for our people. She begins to display the day's harvest with the systematic thoroughness that has always characterized her approach to any important task, but now applied to resources that represent an entirely new category of hunting success. Leather pouches that bulge with nuts and berries are open to reveal their contents in the firelight, each variety carefully identified and explained in terms of its nutritional properties, seasonal availability, and optimal preparation methods. Bundles of medicinal herbs release their aromatic essences as they're unwrapped, filling the cave with scents that speak of healing and health maintenance, of preventive care that will reduce the need for crisis interventions during the difficult seasons that inevitably come to any people who live close to the natural world. Containers of wild honey catch the firelight like liquid gold, their contents representing not just immediate sweetness but also concentrated energy that can sustain hunters during long expeditions, medicine that can soothe coughs and throat infections, and preservative qualities that can extend the storage life of other foods through the winter months. Roots and tubers are arranged in careful groupings that reveal River's Edge's systematic approach to resource categorization: foods that provide immediate energy, others that offer sustained nutrition, some that serve primarily medicinal purposes, and a few that can be processed into materials for tools, clothing, or household items. But perhaps most importantly, River's Edge continues, her voice taking on the quality of wonder that comes from discovering something completely unexpected about the world. We learned that when you approach the forest as a partner, rather than as a territory to be conquered, it becomes generous in ways we never imagined possible. Singing Wolf stands gracefully, her movement creating a soft musical tinkling from the shell ornaments in her hair, and the sound immediately draws everyone's attention in the way that her voice has always been able to command focus and create atmosphere. Tonight, however, her presence carries additional authority earned through the day's unprecedented successes in developing entirely new approaches to human-animal communication. We discovered something today that will change how our people think about our relationship with the other creatures who share our forest home. She begins, her voice carrying the same melodic quality that proved so effective in the wilderness, but now directed toward her human family rather than toward deer and woodland birds. She tells the story of the morning's encounter with the deer family, but her narrative style transforms the simple sequence of events into something that reveals the deeper implications of what occurred. As she describes the initial approach to the watering clearing, her voice creates the atmosphere of patient observation, the gradual building of understanding between species that have always thought of each other as either predator and prey or as competitors for limited resources. When I first spoke to the matriarch doe, Singing Wolf continues, her voice dropping to the same gentle tone she used during that unprecedented interspecies conversation. I wasn't sure she would understand that I was trying to communicate rather than simply making the sounds that humans make when they're preparing to hunt. She pauses, letting the cave's natural acoustics carry her words to every corner of the space, ensuring that even the smallest children can hear and understand what she's describing. The firelight catches her face in a way that emphasizes the wonder that still fills her expression when she recalls that remarkable moment of connection. But she did understand. Singing Wolf continues, her voice gaining strength as she relives the excitement of that breakthrough. Not just the emotional content of what I was trying to convey, but something deeper, the recognition that humans and deer might have more in common than we've ever allowed ourselves to imagine. She describes the extended negotiation that followed, the careful balancing of needs and concerns that characterized both species' approach to the unprecedented situation, the gradual building of trust that made cooperation possible even between creatures who have always assumed they could only relate as predator and prey. What we learned, she explains, beginning to pace slightly as her enthusiasm for the subject grows, is that the animals in our forest are not just resources waiting to be harvested by whoever is strong enough to take them. They're individuals with their own intelligence, their own social relationships, their own valid needs and concerns. Her revelation transforms not just how your people think about hunting, but how they understand their place in the larger web of life that connects all creatures who share the mountain territory that has always been home to your tribe. But Singing Wolf's story goes beyond the philosophical implications of interspecies communication to reveal practical applications that could revolutionize your people's approach to survival and resource management. The deer showed us things about the forest that we would never have discovered through traditional hunting methods. She explains, her voice taking on the quality of someone sharing tactical intelligence of the highest importance. They revealed seasonal patterns in plant growth, optimal locations for gathering specific types of food, weather signs that indicate when conditions will be favorable for different types of resource collection. She describes how the deer's browsing patterns provided information about which plants are reaching peak nutritional content, how their movement routes revealed the locations of water sources that remain reliable even during dry seasons, how their social behaviors indicated the presence of predators or other dangers that could threaten human expeditions into certain areas of the forest. Strong Elk rises from his position near the fire, and the movement draws attention not just because of his impressive physical presence, but because his manner suggests that he has discoveries to share that are as significant as anything the hunting party accomplished during their forest expedition. His massive frame, which has always seemed designed specifically for the challenges of hunting and warfare, now moves with a different kind of confidence, gentler, more thoughtful. carrying the satisfaction that comes from mastering challenges that require finesse rather than power, patience rather than speed, empathy rather than tactical superiority. We learned something that I suspect will surprise all of us. He begins, his deep voice carrying easily through the cave, but modulated to a tone that's more intimate and personal than his usual public speaking manner. We learned that the skills we've developed for hunting and survival in the forest are exactly the same skills that are needed for caring for children, preparing food, and managing the domestic work that makes our cave a home rather than simply a shelter. His observation creates a moment of thoughtful silence as everyone processes the implications of what he's suggesting. The idea that there might be fundamental similarities between the traditionally separate spheres of male and female activity challenges assumptions that have structured your people's thinking for as long as anyone can remember. Taking care of children. Strong Elk continues, his voice carrying a note of wonder that suggests he's still discovering the truth of what he's saying, requires the same kind of patient observation that we use when tracking prey. You have to learn to read subtle signs to understand what someone needs before they can tell you directly, to respond quickly to changing circumstances while maintaining awareness of larger patterns and longer-term goals. He describes his morning's epic battle with Baby Fox's carrying device, but his narrative transforms the frustrating experience into a lesson about approaching unfamiliar challenges with systematic problem-solving rather than simple application of force. I kept trying to make the straps and buckles work the way I thought they should work. He explains, his tone rueful, but also amused by his own initial approach. But eventually I realized I needed to understand how the device was designed to function, what its creator intended, how all the parts were supposed to work together to achieve the goal of safely and comfortably carrying a child. His analysis reveals that domestic tools and technologies are no less sophisticated than hunting equipment, but they require the same kind of understanding and respect that warriors bring to their weapons and hunters bring to their tracking methods. Swift River adds his own perspective to the discussion, displaying the various experimental foods he created during the day and explaining the systematic approach he developed for transforming raw plant materials into nourishment for his people. Cooking, he realizes as he describes his learning process, is actually a form of technology that's just as complex as weapon making or tool construction. You have to understand how heat affects different materials, how timing influences outcomes, how various ingredients interact with each other to create results that are more valuable than any individual component. He demonstrates his grinding techniques, explaining how he learned to apply consistent pressure over extended periods to achieve the fine, even texture that makes seeds and nuts digestible. His description reveals that he approached domestic work with the same analytical mindset that has always characterized his hunting strategies, but applied to challenges that require different skills and different kinds of understanding. Perhaps most remarkably, the children who have witnessed today's unprecedented role reversal begin to contribute their own insights to the evening's discussion, their observations revealing aspects of the experiment that the adults absorbed in their own challenges and discoveries might otherwise have missed. Little Hawk, who has spent the day moving between different groups and observing both the domestic innovations and the hunting expedition's preparations, stands with the confident bearing of someone who has important information to share. I noticed something interesting. He begins, his young voice clear and carrying in the cave's acoustics. Everyone kept saying they were learning to do each other's work, but it seemed to me like they were really learning to do the same work in different places. His observation, delivered with the directness that characterizes children's insights, brings a moment of profound recognition to the adult listeners. The fundamental activities that occupied both groups during the day, problem-solving, resource management, caring for family members, applying creativity to practical challenges, were indeed essentially similar, differentiated more by context and specific tools than by the underlying capabilities required. Little Deer, emboldened by Little Hawk's example and by the day's atmosphere of inclusive discussion, offers her own perspective with the honesty that comes naturally to young children. Grey Wolf tells different stories than Mother does. and he sings different songs, but they make me feel the same way when I'm scared or sad or sleepy. Her comment highlights one of the day's most important discoveries, that there are many different approaches to achieving essential goals, that diversity of method can strengthen overall effectiveness rather than diminishing it, that the particular style someone brings to caregiving or provision or protection matters less than their commitment to the well-being of the people they serve. Young Fox, one of the older children whose natural curiosity has made him an active participant in several of the day's experiments, makes a suggestion that reveals how quickly young minds adapt to new possibilities and begin envisioning even broader applications. What if we didn't just have one day like this, but had some people learn some of everything? So when someone gets hurt or sick or needs to travel far away, other people would know how to do their work until they come back. His proposal represents a fundamental shift in how your tribe might organize itself in the future, moving away from rigid role divisions that can create vulnerability when key individuals are unavailable, toward a more flexible system where multiple people possess overlapping capabilities and can support each other through various challenges and changes. 3 days have passed since the great role reversal, and tonight your tribe has gathered for a special council meeting. The usual seating arrangements around the fire have been quietly modified. Instead of the traditional separation between hunters and gatherers, men and women, everyone sits in a mixed circle where conversations can flow freely across old boundaries. You can feel something different in the atmosphere of your cave home. The air seems lighter, somehow charged with possibility rather than the weight of unchangeable tradition. The fire burns with the same warm light it always has, but tonight it illuminates faces that seem more open, more curious, more connected to each other than they were just a few days ago. Wise Bear rises slowly from his seat, his walking stick steady in his weathered hand. At 70 seasons he has seen your people through droughts and abundance, harsh winters and bountiful summers, times of conflict and periods of peace. But tonight, his ancient eyes hold something you've never seen before, a satisfaction so deep it seems to emanate from his very bones. We gather, he begins, his voice carrying clearly through the cave, to speak of what we have learned, what we have lost, and what we have found. He pauses, letting his gaze travel around the circle, making eye contact with each person. When his eyes meet yours, you feel acknowledged, not just as a member of the tribe, but as an individual whose experiences and insights are valued, whose voice matters in the greater conversation about how your people will live. 3 days ago, he continues, I asked you to step outside the paths your feet have always known. I asked the women to take up spears, the men to tend hearth fires. Some of you thought this was folly, some thought it was wisdom, some simply trusted that old Wise Bear might know something worth discovering. Gentle laughter ripples around the circle, warm and affectionate. Wise Bear's reputation for unexpected insights is well established, but even he seems surprised by how profoundly the experiment has affected everyone. River's Edge, who has been quietly thoughtful since the hunting expedition, asks for permission to speak. Elder, she says, her voice respectful but confident, we discovered that there are as many ways to provide for our people as there are individuals in our tribe. When we stopped trying to hunt like men and started hunting like ourselves, we found gifts in the forest that none of us had imagined. She gestures toward the corner of the cave where the unusual abundance from that first day's expedition still sits, medicinal plants that have already helped several tribe members recover from minor ailments, tools and materials that have been incorporated into daily life, and most importantly, knowledge about sustainable resource management that has changed how everyone thinks about their relationship with the forest. But more than that, she continues, we learned that the forest responds differently when approached with respect rather than force, with patience rather than urgency. The deer we encountered that day, they taught us that intelligence exists in forms we never considered, that cooperation might be more effective than domination. Strong Elk, who has been surprisingly quiet since the role reversal ended, finally speaks up. I learned that my hands, he says, looking down at his large, scarred palms, these hands that I thought were only good for holding weapons and tools, they can be gentle. They can comfort a crying child, prepare food that nourishes rather than simply fills, create clothing that protects and pleases. His voice carries a wonder that touches everyone around the fire. Here is a man whose identity has always been built around physical power and protective capability, discovering that gentleness is not weakness, but another form of strength. When little dear fell and scraped her knee yesterday, he continues, she didn't run to her mother. She came to me because she remembered that my hands had been kind to her during the day when the world was turned upside down. The impact of this statement ripples through the group. Children seeking comfort from men who have learned to offer it, men discovering that nurturing enhances rather than diminishes their strength, women finding that their voices carry authority in areas where they've never been heard. These are changes that extend far beyond the practical skills learned during a single day's experiment. Singing Wolf stands to add her perspective. I found my voice in the forest, she says. Not just the voice that calls children home or sings lullabies, but a voice that could speak to deer, that could make agreements with the trees, that could turn hunting into a conversation between neighbors rather than a battle between enemies. She begins to hum softly, and the sound fills the cave with the same peaceful resonance that called birds from their perches and drew shy woodland creatures into curious visibility. But now, instead of attracting forest animals, her voice draws something equally valuable, the complete focused attention of her human family. We've always known, she continues, that voices can carry messages across long distances, can coordinate activities, can express joy or warning or love. But we learned that voices can also create trust. Where none existed, can build bridges between different kinds of intelligence, can turn strangers into allies. The conversation that follows is unlike any your tribe has ever experienced. Instead of the formal speeches and ritualized responses that usually characterize important council meetings, stories and insights flow naturally from person to person, creating a tapestry of shared understanding. Swift River talks about discovering that cooking is not just a necessary task, but a form of creative expression, a way to combine elements into something that nourishes both body and spirit. Bright Moon describes how learning to handle a spear taught her about balance and leverage in ways that have actually improved her basket weaving. Grey Wolf shares his amazement at how quickly he developed intuitive understanding of child psychology, how caring for young ones revealed patience he never knew he possessed. But perhaps most significantly, the children themselves are included in this conversation in ways that would have been unthinkable before the role reversal. Little Hawk, whose questions during the men's domestic day led to several practical innovations, is asked to share his observations. Little Deer, whose preferences helped Grey Wolf develop his childcare techniques, is invited to demonstrate the song she learned. As you listen to these voices weaving together, you realize that something fundamental has shifted in how your tribe understands itself. The rigid categories that once defined everyone's role and identity have given way to something more fluid, more responsive to individual capabilities and interests, more adaptable to changing circumstances. Wise Bear, who has been listening to all this with deep satisfaction, finally raises his hand for attention. You have learned, he says, what I hoped you might discover but could not simply tell you. You have learned that survival depends not on maintaining unchanging traditions, but on being willing to question, to experiment, to discover new ways of using the gifts each person brings to our people. He gestures toward the cave entrance where the night sky is visible beyond the firelight. Out there, the forest continues its eternal dance of seasons, growth, change, adaptation. The trees that survive are not those that resist the wind, but those that learn to bend with it while keeping their roots strong. Our people can learn from this wisdom. His words carry a weight of finality, but also of beginning. The experiment that began as a single day's reversal of roles has become something larger, a recognition that your tribe's strength comes not from rigid adherence to established patterns, but from the creative capacity to adapt, to learn to discover new ways of thriving in an ever-changing world. As the council meeting draws toward its close, you feel a deep sense of completion settling in your chest. The questions that were raised 3 days ago have been answered, but in ways no one anticipated. Instead of simply learning whether women could hunt and men could manage domestic responsibilities, your people have discovered that everyone has capabilities that extend far beyond traditional role definitions, that cooperation creates possibilities that individual effort could never achieve, and that wisdom comes not from knowing all the answers, but from remaining curious about new questions. The fire burns lower, and gradually conversations begin to wind down toward the comfortable murmur that precedes sleep. But you sense that tonight's gathering has created something that will continue to grow and develop long after the embers have cooled to ash, a new understanding of what it means to be a people, a recognition that strength comes from flexibility, and a commitment to continuing the process of discovery and adaptation that has just begun. In the days that followed, the great council life in your tribe settled into rhythms that were both familiar and subtly transformed. The roles returned to their traditional patterns, men resumed their hunting expeditions, women continued their gathering and domestic work, but the boundaries had become more permeable, the definitions more flexible. You find yourself on this peaceful evening, sitting at the entrance to your cave, watching the last light of day fade from amber to deep purple behind the western mountains. The air is soft and warm, carrying the scents of pine needles and distant rain, and the familiar sounds of your people preparing for sleep drift from the cave behind you. But tonight, these ordinary activities carry an extraordinary undercurrent of contentment. When Strong Elk returns from the day's hunt, he doesn't simply deposit his catch and disappear to tend his weapons. Instead, he spends time with the children, his large hands gentle as he helps little deer with a weaving project, his deep voice joining grey wolves in the evening lullabies that have become a treasured new tradition. River's Edge, back to her usual gathering work, now incorporates techniques learned during her brief hunting career. Her understanding of animal behavior has enriched her ability to find the best foraging areas, and her patient observation skills have revealed sustainable harvesting practices that ensure abundance for future seasons. The changes are subtle but profound, like ripples spreading outward from a stone dropped in still water. Men who learn to comfort children now bring emotional intelligence to their hunting partnerships, reading the moods and needs of their companions with the same sensitivity they once applied only to tracking prey. Women who discovered their voices could carry authority now contribute to hunting strategy, discussions, their insights valued for the different perspectives they bring to familiar challenges. But perhaps most remarkably, the children, who witnessed the great role reversal, have absorbed lessons that will shape their entire approach to life. Little Hawk, who saw both men and women master unfamiliar skills, has grown up believing that capabilities are not limited by gender, that creativity comes from questioning assumptions, that strength takes many forms. As you sit in the gathering darkness, breathing in the peace of your mountain home, you reflect on how much has changed and how much has remained constant. Your people still face the eternal challenges of survival, the need for food and shelter, protection from predators and harsh weather, the delicate balance of maintaining social harmony while adapting to changing circumstances. But now they face these challenges with a broader understanding of their own capabilities, a deeper appreciation for each other's contributions, and a greater flexibility in how they organize their efforts. When Swift River's shoulder was injured last week, he didn't sit uselessly while healing. Instead, he took over childcare duties with skills he learned during the great experiment freeing Gentle Rain to join a crucial gathering expedition. When the autumn berry harvest proved more abundant than expected, Singing Wolf's voice techniques were used to coordinate multiple gathering teams across vast stretches of forest, her calls carrying information about locations, quantities, and optimal harvesting times more effectively than any traditional signaling system. These innovations feel natural now, integrated so seamlessly into daily life that it's hard to remember when they seemed revolutionary. Your tribe has not abandoned its traditions. Instead, it has discovered that true tradition lies not in unchanging repetition of specific practices, but in the underlying values of cooperation, innovation, and mutual care that allow any society to thrive across generations. As full darkness settles over your mountain territory, the night sounds begin their familiar symphony. Owls call from the oak trees, their voices carrying across the valleys with messages you're still learning to interpret. Small creatures rustle through the underbrush on their mysterious nocturnal errands. In the distance, a wolf pack begins their evening song, voices harmonizing in patterns that speak of territory, family bonds, and the ancient communication systems that have sustained their kind for countless generations. But tonight, these wild voices are joined by something new. From within your cave comes the sound of grey wolf and strong elk, singing together, their deep voices blending in lullabies that draw from traditional melodies, but incorporate new verses celebrating the discoveries of recent days. Children's voices occasionally join in, and even some of the women hum along as they complete evening tasks. The song that emerges is neither traditional nor revolutionary, but something that honors both heritage and innovation. It tells the story of a people who learned that strength comes in many forms, that wisdom can be found in unexpected places, that cooperation creates possibilities that individual effort could never achieve. You close your eyes and let the sound wash over you, feeling the vibrations resonate in your chest, connecting you to your family, your tribe, your place in the larger web of life that includes forest and mountain deer and owl season and weather past and future. This is what home sounds like when people understand that they are stronger together than apart, more creative when they question than when they assume, more resilient when they adapt than when they resist. Wise Bear's voice rises above the others for a moment, adding a verse that makes everyone smile. The forest taught us secrets that our hearts had always known, that every gift has value when its worth is clearly shown. The laughter that follows is warm and appreciative, the sound of people who have learned to delight in each other's discoveries, to celebrate innovations that make everyone's life richer and more fulfilling. As the song gradually fades into the comfortable murmur of people settling down for sleep, you remain at the cave entrance for a few more minutes, reluctant to let go of this perfect moment of peace and contentment. The stars have emerged in their full glory, now scattered across the black sky like sparks from some cosmic fire. You've always found comfort in their presence, these distant lights that have guided your people's migrations and marked the passage of seasons since time began. But tonight they seem to be winking with approval, as if the entire universe is pleased with your tribe's small but significant discovery about the flexibility of roles and the importance of remaining open to new possibilities. A gentle breeze stirs the trees around your cave, and in its whisper you hear something that might be imagination, or might be the forest's own voice, speaking words that will follow you into sleep. Finally, humans understood. Survival is not due to the strength of men or women, but because they know how to share. You make your way back into the cave, where your sleeping place waits among the soft furs and woven blankets that represent generations of skill and care. Around you, your people are settling into sleep, their breathing gradually synchronizing into the peaceful rhythm that has always marked the end of each day's efforts and the beginning of each night's rest. But as you lie down and pull your covers up to your chin, you realize that tonight's rest will be different from any sleep you've known before. Your body is relaxed and your mind is calm, but there's also an undercurrent of excitement, a sense that tomorrow holds possibilities that didn't exist a week ago. You think about the deer you encountered during that strange and wonderful hunting expedition, wondering if they're settling down for the night in some secret meadow, if they remember the unprecedented conversation they shared with unusual humans who approached them with respect rather than aggression. Perhaps they're telling their own stories about the day when hunting became negotiation, when predator and prey discovered they could be something more like neighbors. You think about the children who participated in the great role reversal, who saw their parents and elders demonstrate that learning never stops, that assumptions can always be questioned, that creativity flourishes when people are willing to step outside familiar patterns. These children will grow up with a fundamentally different understanding of what's possible, of how societies can adapt and evolve while maintaining their core values of mutual care and cooperation. Most of all, you think about the changes you've witnessed in yourself and in everyone around you. the discovery that capabilities extend far beyond traditional role definitions, that innovation comes from combining different perspectives, that strength is multiplied when shared rather than hoarded. These lessons have become part of who your people are, integrated so deeply that they will influence every decision, every challenge, every opportunity that lies ahead. As sleep begins to claim you, your last conscious thought is one of profound gratitude for Wise Bear's wisdom in proposing the experiment, for your people's courage in embracing it, for the forest's patience in teaching new lessons to old assumptions, and for the simple but revolutionary discovery that life becomes richer and more beautiful when everyone is free to contribute their unique gifts to the common good. Your breathing slows and deepens, matching the rhythm of the sleeping tribe around you, and gradually you drift into dreams filled with the soft sounds of cooperation, the warm glow of shared discovery, and the peaceful certainty that tomorrow will bring new opportunities to continue the great adventure of learning how to live well together in this complex and generous world. Outside the cave, the night sounds continue their ancient symphony, and the forest keeps its eternal watch over all the creatures who call it home. The wind rustles through the leaves with something that sounds remarkably like satisfied laughter, as if the trees themselves approve of what they've witnessed. Humans finally understanding that survival is not a competition, but a collaboration, that wisdom comes not from knowing all the answers, but from remaining curious about new questions, and that the greatest strength of any people lies in their willingness to keep growing, changing, and discovering new ways to care for each other and for the world that sustains them all. The story ends, as all good stories should, not with a conclusion but with a beginning. Your tribe has learned that roles can be flexible, that assumptions can be questioned, that innovation comes from cooperation rather than competition. But more importantly, they've learned that learning itself is the greatest adventure, that every day offers new opportunities to discover something unexpected about themselves and their world. And so they sleep peacefully, ready to wake tomorrow to continue the great experiment of living consciously, creatively, and compassionately in a world full of endless possibilities for those brave enough to keep questioning, keep learning, and keep growing together. In the morning, the women will return to gathering and the men to hunting, but they will do so with expanded understanding, enhanced skills, and enriched appreciation for each other's contributions. And when the next challenge arises, as challenges always do, they will meet it not with rigid adherence to old patterns, but with the flexible wisdom that comes from understanding that there are always new ways to solve old problems, that every individual has gifts worth discovering, and that cooperation creates possibilities that individual effort could never achieve. The forest whispers its approval. The stars keep their ancient watch, and your people sleep the deep, contented sleep of those who have discovered that the greatest security comes not from resisting change, but from embracing the ongoing adventure of learning how to live wisely and well in an ever-changing world. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler. May your own sleep be filled with the peaceful recognition that tomorrow always holds new possibilities for those willing to approach it with curiosity, courage, and an open heart. Thank you for joining this journey into an alternative Stone Age where roles were fluid, assumptions were questioned, and cooperation created possibilities no one had imagined. May your dreams be filled with the peaceful recognition that every day offers opportunities to discover new ways of living wisely and well together.